This episode of the Music Tech Teacher podcast is brought to you by Smart Music. Still the trusted way to connect teachers and students, the new Smart Music is in the cloud, so it works with the devices your students have today. Best of all, you can use it for free. Learn more at smartmusic.com. You're listening to the Music Tech Teacher podcast, episode number 16. Welcome to the Music Tech Teacher podcast. Music tech tips, lesson ideas, advice, news and interviews, especially for music teachers. Brought to you by midnightmusic.com.au. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Music Tech Teacher podcast. I'm your host, Katie Wardrobe from midnightmusic.com.au, the place for music teachers to get the help they need using technology in music education. It's also the home of the Midnight Music community, where you can find music tech online courses, video tutorials, tips and personalised support. For more information about the community and a special offer for podcast listeners, go to midnightmusic.com.au/podcast offer. Today I'm going to talk about one of my favourite topics, and this is creative composition lesson ideas that incorporate technology. It's a topic that comes up often in workshops and Facebook group discussions, but it's usually worded in a couple of different ways. So often I see people posting the question, I have GarageBand or Soundtrap or Soundation or Mixcraft, insert name of software program here, or iPads or Chromebooks, and what are some of the things that I can use it for in my classroom or with my students? The other question that comes up a little bit on the same lines is, what are some creative activities or engaging lesson ideas that I can do with my students, particularly middle school students? I have so many ideas for these types of lessons, and I decided to share some of them here in this episode, and I really did have to narrow down the list. I've chosen kind of the most popular ones, the ones that have lasted over the years and withstood the test of time, I guess you could say. And I'd love to just run through some of them here. Before I get started, it's really important to note a couple of things. Now, the first one is that almost all of these activities are possible without the technology. So if your preference is to run them without the tech aspect, feel free, do what works best for you. Some of them will even work, with a combination of non-tech tools. And by non-tech, that might be singing or playing instruments and so on. And then you might sort of slide the technology in to one part of the lesson. I'm going to talk through how I've done them from a tech point of view, but of course you can adapt them. Now, the second thing is that it's also really important to think about, first of all, your music and education outcomes. So what is it that you want to achieve with the lesson? What do you want the kids to learn? And once you've worked that out, see if the technology will help you achieve those outcomes or support you in what you do, or allow you to do something in a different way that you couldn't do without the technology. So here are some of my ideas for incorporating technology into composition projects. And first of all, just a few tips. So these are general tips about running these lessons. My first tip is to start really simple. So you want to do sort of short, quick activities, I think, to start with. It just makes it a lot easier. And this is just from a general composition point of view, not even, with the tech aspect involved. But doing short, quick activities just means that that composition becomes a part of everyday life for students, rather than being some big scary thing that they might have to do every once in a while. Doing these activities often is also really good. I just shared a presentation sort of workshop time slot with another teacher who's based here in Melbourne. And one of the things that she does is to incorporate composition of some sort every day through really short activities. Kids don't even know that they're doing composition really. And it really sort of brought that home for me, that it's important to just include these activities all the time. Now, she and I both, in our presentations that we gave at this event together, she and I both separately said the same thing, which was that it's really good to apply limitations or parameters to the composition project or assignment for students. It actually makes creation a lot easier than being given a broad slate with no guidelines or very few guidelines. For instance, when I started running workshops, I really did want to do some film scoring workshops, and I wouldn't class myself as a composer. I haven't grown up doing composition lessons, but of course I compose. I just don't, in my head, I don't call it that. I don't, feel like I deserve the right to call myself a composer, but of course I do compose. I compose little bits all the time. And arranging is one thing that I do very frequently. And of course, composing is of arranging. So, when you're arranging a piece of music, of course you're composing in that process as well. Now, applying limitations and parameters can help a lot. So the film scoring thing, when I first wanted to consider doing that as part of a workshop, I thought, man, where do you start? You have a video and you want to go away and write a soundtrack. So that to me just seemed really daunting. And when I thought about it and looked into it and did some research and thought about the way I could approach it, I ended up breaking it down into very small bite-sized steps and applying some parameters. And I'm going to talk a little bit about film scoring later on, so I'll talk through what those parameters are. But if you have some sort of parameters involved, it makes it so much easier. So these limitations might be something like giving students a scale, a specific scale that they need to use to compose with. So the pentatonic scale, for instance, or the Dorian mode. Something like that can be a lot easier. Maybe you might provide them with a chord sequence of some sort, and they need to write a melody that will go over the top of that. But the limitation or parameter is the chord sequence. Of course, you don't want to do this forever. At some point, the kids are going to want to compose freely, but it's such a great place to start. Focusing on one aspect can also be really useful, particularly when you're starting out. So maybe students might be just composing rhythmic pieces to start with, and not worrying about pitch, no problem, sort of thinking about melody at the same time. Later on, you might provide a rhythm for them, and they have to compose the melody, so they're going to work with the pitches in that case. You can work up later on to bigger projects that involve more than one aspect or everything all at once. And I just find that starting off small, doing bite-sized steps at a time really does help. So let's get into the ideas that I want to share with you today. So these are things that I've tried in workshops and with students in the past, and they've worked really, really well. The first one is what I'm calling Guess My Sound Effects Story. For this one, students can work in groups if you want to. This one actually does work really well as a group activity, but they can work in groups to plan a short story. Just 2 or 3 sentences will do. You want to keep this nice and short. And what they're going to do is work out how they can tell the story with sound effects only. So there's not going to be a narrator reading out the story as such. They're going to need to see if they can convey the story just with sound effects. Now, some of the time you might find it's easier to provide maybe 3 or 4 stories that you've kind of come up with ahead of time that you want the students to use. But if you've got the class time, it's great if they can come up with them with themselves. I've done it before in the past where I've provided at least a topic. So it might be something like walking to school, and, the students will make up some sort of story about walking to school. And, the story might involve what did they encounter when they were walking to school, and they're going to tell that story with the sound effects. So from a tech point of view, after they've done the planning of the story, they can then record the sound effects in order of the story in some kind of audio editing or recording software or an app on an iPad. Lots of different options for the actual tech tool that you can use here. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not about, the tech tool in the first place. It's about what do you want to achieve, and then do you have the technology to support that. So options here might be GarageBand app on the iPad is a great one. Audacity on a Mac or a PC computer. If you've got Chromebooks, you might want to use Soundtrap or Soundation, which are both web-based tools that you can use on that. Lots of different options, but whatever you have access to will work for this. So students can piece together the sound effects, they can perform them, or they might even find ready-made ones in the loop library that might be with the software that you're using, if there is a loop library of some sort. And they can put them together in the software and create their recording that way. Now, after they've done this, you can have like a performance in inverted commas where each group will play their story, their sound effects story for the rest of the class. And it's up to the rest of the students to guess what has happened, to come up with what is the sequence of events that have gone on in this story. So that's where the mystery part comes in. So hopefully that works out well. Now, the other way I've done this in the past is actually to do like a live performance of the sound effects instead of just pressing play on a recording. And the app that I've used in the past to do the live version is MadPad on the iPad. Now, MadPad is like a soundboard with 12 squares, and you can record a sound in each of those squares. And it actually does video and sound at the same time. So, for instance, you might hold up the iPad using the MadPad app in front of a door, and someone can shut the door, and you'll see a little video of the door shutting and the sound to accompany it. So you can actually plug the iPad with the MadPad app open into a data projector, and it shows on the screen. And the group that's used MadPad could then perform their sound effects live in order for their story, and the class could guess at the end of their performance. Now, the second composition idea is to take a hand clapping game and have students compose their own rhythmic variations on the hand clapping game. Now, the one that I've been using this year, and I don't know if I mentioned this in a previous podcast episode, but I have been wanting to use the boom, snap, clap clapping game for quite some time in workshops, and I hadn't until this year really figured out a way to incorporate it. And this year I came up with a great idea of using it in workshops and doing this whole unit of work based on this clapping game. So the idea here is that students will learn the boom, snap, clap clapping game, and it's just a rhythmic pattern which you can do either as an individual or in pairs. It works really well in pairs. So they're going to learn the clapping game and then compose their own variations using body percussion. Lots of fun. Now, I'll link to a couple of YouTube videos that show you how the boom, snap, clap clapping game works. And there's one that I found quite early on. It's a couple of girls, I think they're sisters, and they teach the clapping game. That was the first one that I found, and they do a really good job. It's really great. But earlier this year, I found another video, sort of stumbled across it, of a couple of teenagers doing a variation on the boom, snap, clap clapping game. And their one is really cool. They've got, maybe 7 or 8 different versions of, sort of variations on the main rhythm that they perform. And they do it without words. The first 2 girls that I mentioned, they actually do it with, saying the words of the rhyme over the top of the clapping. But the second video, they leave that out, and it maybe gives it a bit of a cooler aspect rather than the first one, which I would probably do with younger students. But the second one is really great for teenagers. So they can learn this clapping game, and as I said, I've been doing this in workshops with teachers this year, and it's gone down really well so far. Everybody gets very excited and has lots of fun learning the clapping game. And then we talk through the options for composing variations on the theme. And then we talk through actually how we can use technology for other aspects after you've composed and performed your own variations. So one thing is that you can notate the rhythm. And the basic rhythm, which I'll just say for you now in the word version, is boom, snap, clap, ba-boom, snap, clap, snap, boom, snap, clap, ba-boom, snap, shh. Boom, snap, clap, ba-boom, snap, clap, snap, boom, snap, clap, ba-boom, snap, shh. So you can get students to write that out in notation. There's multiple ways you can notate it. It doesn't have to be in a traditional notation format or style. It doesn't have to be using Sibelius or Finale or Noteflight software. You can actually get them to notate it graphically. And you could get them to draw pictures on a piece of paper, which you then take a photo of, and that becomes part of the digital portfolio of work that they might be collecting for this unit of work. Or they can just notate it using something even like PowerPoint, where each of the sounds in the rhythm is represented by a different shape, and they can piece together those shapes in order on the screen. So that's one idea for notating. There's lots of other things that you can do there. But after notating it and sort of, becoming conscious of the rhythm that's involved with boom, snap, clap, They can then record that pattern, actually record it in software on an app, and also record their composed variations too. Now, the app that I've used in workshops for this part is the Groove Pizza online app, and it's a great little drum machine. It's a little drum sequencer that you can use. You basically just bring it up in a web browser. It works on Chromebooks and iPads and Macs and PCs, so basically on every device, Android devices too, and you can record the drum pattern in there. And so the boom, snap, clap pattern has 3 different sounds: the boom, the snap, and the clap. And Groove Pizza, this online recording tool, allows you to record patterns with 3 different sounds, coincidentally. So it worked perfectly for this. So that's a great option for creativity, using technology and composing at the same time, just in quite a simple way. I'll probably talk a little bit more about that boom, snap, clap unit in a future episode, particularly with regard to digital portfolios and how to create digital portfolios and examples. I'm thinking I might use that unit of work as an example of the types of things that you can put into a digital portfolio to represent all the student work that they've done. So idea number 3, lesson number 3, or a couple of lessons maybe, is one called Wrap My Name. And again, this is something where you can make it quite simple, or you can make it, with extension opportunities, make it a more complex or advanced activity. And this is where students are going to write a rap based on themselves. So it's going to feature their name and just have a couple of lines in there about something they like. Now, this is, where once again you can use some sort of structure if you want to. And I've actually written this out as a full lesson plan, which you can download. I'll put a link to that in the show notes so that you can download a copy if you want to try it with your students. But in the lesson plan that I put together for my website, I've given you a structure for the rap. So, if you don't have a lot of class time to spend on the writing aspect and you want to get to the recording aspect of this activity, you can just use that structure and it simplifies things a little bit. Of course, students can vary the structure, and the structure is basically that the first line says, my name is, and you fill in the gap here. So my name is Katie and I like to, and then you fill in a word of something you like. So my name is Katie and I like to sing. That might be the example that I use. Then you say a couple of lines about the thing that you like. And then it finishes off with standard lines, which are, I like that. Oh yeah, I like that. And students can use that and just fill in the gap. So they're only really writing a couple of lines and filling in a couple of words, and that works really well if you want to provide a structure for them. Now, that's not the end of the lesson there. Of course, they've got that rap. Now, the great thing is that they can compose a rhythmic backing to go along with their rap. And what you can do if you've, again, got class time, you can get the students to record their backing and then record their rap over the backing. Now, again, it's not about a specific technology tool. There are lots of different ways you can do this. So things that I've used in the past, to create the actual backing itself, you could use Groove Pizza that I mentioned in the previous example. So students can create their little online rhythmic backing using Groove Pizza. You can actually download your recording from there and put it in some sort of software program like GarageBand or Audacity, something else, and then you can get the students to record their rap over that backing that they've created. That works really, really well. Other things you could do is use an existing loop for the backing. If you don't want to spend the class time on the backing part of it and you want to get to the recording part, with the recording the rap itself, you might just get the students to put together some kind of rhythmic backing using existing drum loops that they find. They can also play drum parts and record drum parts from scratch in things like GarageBand on Macs or GarageBand on the iPad, or Mixcraft on PCs, or Soundtrap on any device. Soundtrap works on any device. They can put together a backing using those things. And that lesson's worked really, really well in the past for me, and also for lots of teachers that have done it. I've been sent some great student examples from all over the world actually, which has been really lovely to hear. Sort of year 8 students in America, and I've had grade 5 and 6 students here in Australia, and it's so great for me to hear some examples of people using it. So that one's worked really well. You can do that lesson in, a single lesson, or spread it over 2 or 3 if you want to, depending on the way that you approach it. Now, the fourth lesson idea is one that I call Transform the Blues. And this involves recording a blues chord progression, so the 12-bar blues, but actually in a non-blues style, which sounds a little bit weird, but there's actually quite a few examples that you can play students of this, like the James Brown song, I Feel Good. That one uses a 12-bar blues sequence, and it's not really in a blues style itself. So you can get students to do this. They can be a little bit creative with the blues. So you might have been doing the blues with them. Perhaps you've spent some time learning the chord progression. You might have played it on ukuleles or guitars or keyboards. Maybe they've sung some blues over the top, and you've done some listening activities. But now they could compose their own blues, but in a non-blues style. So the options for doing this are to pick a drum pattern, first of all, often is a great place to start, because the drum pattern makes a massive difference, as you know, to the style. As soon as you have some kind of drum pattern in there, which is not a blues kind of, swung kind of style, it's going to change the feeling and the mood of the piece altogether. I've actually done this in the past where I've created a blues bass line in a completely different style, something like dubstep. And so I've chosen, say in GarageBand, I've chosen, like a dubstep kind of keyboard sound, and I've recorded a blues bass line using that sound, and then added a drum pattern in the dubstep style as well. And it really does transform it. It takes it, right away from that traditional blues style and turns it into something completely different. It's a great springboard for talking about the types of things that arrangers can do to transform, the style of a piece and make changes and make a piece their own, is by, changing or altering some of the musical elements of a piece of music. So that's a great place to talk about that with students, where you can say what a big difference the drum pattern makes, and, things like choice of instruments as well. Once they've recorded their blues backing, so they might record a blues bass line, they might record a drum part, and they might record some other inner parts, sort of chordal parts as well. They could then record their own blues melody over the top, so they can use the blues scale and improvise something or work something out ahead of time and record that over the top. Now, once again, all of the software and apps that I've mentioned for the other projects all work here as well. So you just need something that will allow you to record into, and preferably one of the sequencing type software or apps like GarageBand and Soundtrap and Mixcraft and iPad GarageBand as well. All work really well for this. Now, I've actually got, again, the instructions written out for this as a lesson plan. The one that I've got is actually designed for the iPad, so it talks about using GarageBand for iPad, but really you could totally adjust this for other desktop software as well. So if you want to download that project, you can do, and then you can adapt it yourself for whatever software program you're using with your students. The fifth idea is one I call Write a Chart Topper. And this is to do with songwriting, and it's really very similar to the previous project where we talked about transforming the blues. But here you can ask students to do some songwriting to a brief, to a specific limitation or parameter. There's options here for the types of limitations you can put into place. So one thing that I've used in the past is by doing some listening to the 4-chord pop song sequence. Now, I'm sure you've all used, that Axis of Awesome film clip, music group. They do a whole stack of pop songs all as a medley that all use the same 4-chord sequence, being chord 1, followed by 5, followed by 6, followed by 4. And, you can play them, that video, as a lead up and, talk about that and talk about the songs. And you could even get the students to perform some of those songs and sing over the top of their, the chords that they might be playing on guitar or keyboard, and so on. So after you've done singing and playing and listening, great for them to compose their own 4-chord song. So once again, you can do the same types of things that I mentioned earlier. They could record a backing of some sort using those chords. They would need to choose their own tempo and style and key. And then after they've put that in place, they can record a melody over the top. They can write their own melody and lyrics with it as well if you want them to do that, and record that over the top of the 4-chord progression that they've put together in the past. So again, that works really well. Now, other songwriting parameters that I like, in terms of sort of writing a chart topper, this project, other things that I've used are the drone or pedal note concept. So you can play them some examples of people that have used drones or pedal notes as the basis for a composition, and talk through the sorts of chord sequences that will work with a repeated note that works through all of the chords in the progression. There's a couple of examples of recent songs. I'll link to them in the show notes, but there's a Shawn Mendes song. He's very popular at the moment. One of his songs uses a repeated sort of pedal note throughout the song, so it's a great example to play. Guy Sebastian is an artist here in Australia, and he has a recent song as well, which uses this idea of a pedal note all the way through. Of course, you can play them classical examples. So the Chopin, I think it's the Raindrop Prelude, isn't it, which uses a single repeated note throughout as well, and get them to do some listening in that regard first. And then get them to compose their own pedal note or drone song. I've also done this with, funnily enough, NASA sounds. So NASA released a whole stack of free sounds, a couple of years ago. And one of the sounds that you can download for free and you can use, with no copyright restrictions or anything, is the sound of a Kepler star. And the one that I've used to create a drone or a pedal note composition is a really low kind of single note that's produced by this star, which NASA recorded. And that made a great basis for a song that I put together in GarageBand, just as an example. And it worked really, really well. Other things that I've done as well are to get students to only use the notes of the pentatonic scale. That works really well. Or notes of the Dorian mode also works really well. So one of those parameters, it can just help if you've got that in place rather than just sending kids off to write a song, just, go and write a song and not providing any other limitations for them. This episode of the Music Tech Teacher podcast is brought to you by Smart Music. Smart Music is the music learning platform that allows teachers to connect with students as they practice. It makes it easy to create individualised assignments, hear student recordings, and provides specific guidance. Smart Music also empowers students by providing them with immediate feedback, both in terms of rhythm and pitch. This feedback transforms practice from passive repetition to active learning. The new Smart Music brings these resources into the cloud, so they work with Chromebooks, iPads, and other devices your students use today. Best of all, you can use it for free with limited repertoire, or access the full Smart Music library with an affordable pricing model that can be customised to fit any sized program. Learn more at smartmusic.com. The last couple of lesson ideas or project ideas are possibly the most popular ones and so far that, since the time of me starting to run workshops. I'm going to talk about movie soundtracks, film scoring, and also video game composing as well. Now, film scoring I've been doing for quite a long time, and video game music really just last year I started running workshops about doing video game composition because it's become such a big thing and it's a massive industry. So with video game composing, the kids really hear, well, from my regard anyway, I'm not a gamer as such. I have 2 boys and they love playing video games. So I kind of know about the games. I'm fairly familiar with what they are. I don't really play them myself. It's just not my area of interest. But I do love hearing the music and learning more about the music. So this is a place where this is a great thing to ask the students. Do they have actual examples that they'd like to share with you? You can do lots of listening. There's heaps of videos on YouTube where you can listen to soundtracks from games. You don't need to actually open up the game necessarily to hear the soundtrack. You'll find examples on YouTube for all of the really popular ones. And I will actually link in the show notes to an article of I think it's 10 or 15 of the most popular video game composers. So that will give you a starting point if you want to do some listening with your students ahead of them composing something themselves. Now, the reason I've brought in that, asking for student suggestions is that one of my community members, Janice Cook, who's a teacher in the States, she has been running with her students a video game composition unit. And this is because I shared, all of the things that I've been doing in my online community, in the Midnight Music community, and I've got tutorial videos in there for a couple of projects, which I'll talk you through in a moment. But she had been running those projects with her students, and she said that this is the thing that they wanted to do in the lesson, was they got so excited about this whole thing that they wanted to share their own examples, share the things that they were passionate about with the games that they have been playing. So great starting place. There are lots of different styles of gaming music, and very popular are, really beautiful orchestral scores. And my understanding with a lot of gaming scores is that they are done in the same way as film scores are done. They do hire a big orchestra. I've actually seen videos online. They do hire a big orchestra. They have a recording session just like they do for the film scores. And again, my understanding is that this industry is as big, maybe bigger than the film industry now. So it's such a massive thing. So a couple of projects that I've done are a kind of a simple one to start with, followed by a more complex one. And the first simple one is to create a Mario Brothers style theme with an online tool which is free called Beepbox. And again, I'll link to that in the show notes. So if you're out and about and you don't have a pen handy to write all these things down, you can just go and download the list of things in the show notes. And Beepbox allows you just to create a very simple Mario theme. You can actually create maybe 4 layers, I think, altogether. So 4 different parts which will play simultaneously. One of the layers is a rhythmic one, so like a drum pattern, but the other 3 are melodic. You can keep it really simple and just do one layer, so one instrumental part. And the thing that I've suggested and done in workshops is to create a question and answer. So the Beepbox is like a little online sequencer, and you basically click on squares to get it to play certain pitches in order. And just one cycle through of the Beepbox screen is equivalent to 1 bar. So you can do, I think it's 1 bar, maybe it's 2 bars. No, I think it's 1 bar. And then you can create, so that can be your first pattern on the first screen. And then you can actually set up a second one so that you can have a contrasting thing. So question and answer works really well, or A and B theme. And just a really simple tool to get started with video game music. Once you've created something on that website, you can download that and then put it into other software and add other parts to it if you wanted to. But it is great as a standalone short activity. Now, the second thing I've done is a more involved project, which is what I've called Create Your Own Epic Battle Music Theme. And as I mentioned before, this is something, I've got full instructions videos in my online community about how to do this in different software programs. But essentially this involves composing music in a kind of a battle style to go with a game that would involve, some kind of suspenseful thing happening. So the example I use, which is a very generic example, is maybe, the game character is walking through the forest and, everything's okay. You're not really sure what's going to happen, but everything seems to be all right. So while that sort of scene is happening in the game, you would have one type of music, which is, fairly relaxed and simple and nice. And then something happens in the game where the game is triggered and you go, I feel like something sinister is about to occur. And you know this because the music changes. So the students are going to then compose, a second version of the same loop of music, which ends up giving the player the feeling that something's going to happen. So this is where musically you might add in some more rhythmic instruments. There might be a bit of a driving beat that starts to play. and maybe there are more instruments involved. Now, the third version of this same loop of music is going to be where, the bad guys just appeared. And you're going to add in perhaps more instruments at this point. This might be where everybody's playing. The music's more intense, the rhythmic elements are more intense. And as a player, you think, oh my gosh, this is bad. Something really is going to happen. And, the battle starts, or, the bad guy appears out of the forest and you're engaging in some kind of fight. So this is called a layered loop approach to composing in games. And it's something that apparently, a lot of game composers do, because essentially the gamer is the one that changes the music by the actions that they take in the game. So when they're playing along, and they're walking through the forest, obviously something will happen in the game that they do, which triggers the next stage to happen. Now, as a composer, it always, sort of fascinated me. How would the composer know how long to compose for when these timing things could vary between players? Some players may progress quite quickly through different stages of a game, and therefore you would need shorter music for each part. And some players may actually take quite a long time. So it always fascinated me what was the approach here from a composition point of view. And I watched a great online webinar which Noteflight ran, which featured a composer called Chance Thomas, who's a game composer, and he talked about this layered loop approach being one of the techniques that game composers employ, where they create essentially musically one loop of music, but there are variations on that loop which work well with different scenes in the game. So that's the second example there. Now, this one again works in all of those programs that we've mentioned earlier, so you just need to choose whichever tool you've got and adapt for that particular one. The last thing I want to talk about, again, one of my favourites, is composing movie soundtracks, film scoring. Now, this is really, really popular with students and adults and everybody in between. It just works really well, and it makes, you can just be really creative with this sort of project. Once again, I've got a couple of different things that I've done in the past, a sort of a simple project to start off with, and then a more complex project after that. What I've done in the past is start with the sound effects aspect. Now, the reason for this is to actually get students used to matching up sound of some sort with action on the screen. This is one of those projects which really only does work with technology. You can sort of do a live performance of a film score, and I've actually got a blog post which was written by a guest blog poster on my website about that, so I will link to that. But if you want to put it all together with in a movie file, the student's soundtrack and the movie itself, then this is really best done in a software program that can handle both video and audio. Now, I'll talk tech tools first because there are more limitations with this activity than the previous ones we've talked through so far. And the best choices here are on a Mac, GarageBand. If you've got GarageBand, or if you've got Logic Pro, of course, that's a great option too. So either of those work really well for Mac. If you're on a PC, I really think Mixcraft is the best option here. I've done it also in Acid Music Studio, so if you also have that, already have that, then go ahead and use that. That works quite well. But Mixcraft is my preferred choice for PC. If you're on Chromebooks, this is a much harder activity to do in the way that I'm going to describe it in a moment, because the software that you use on Chromebooks, being, say, Soundtrap or Soundation, don't really allow you to put video into your music, file that you're building up. So when you're putting together the soundtrack itself, you can't see the film play alongside like you can in GarageBand and Mixcraft. I've also done this in notation software too. So I'm a Sibelius user, so I've done it in that. I'm sure it would work in Finale in the same way. But again, it's a really great activity. It's a bit harder in notation. I tend to save that for older students. It works really well with sort of year 9, 10, 11, 12. With middle school, I'm more likely to use GarageBand or Mixcraft with that age group. So the two projects that I've done in the past are, as I mentioned before, just to start off with a short film and putting sound effects to match exactly with the action on screen. Now, when I say short films, I really do mean short. So the first video that I often use is something like 15 seconds long, which sounds ridiculously short, but that would be a whole lesson's worth of work. You could use that for the whole lesson. If you're doing a sort of a little bit more extended project, I would be heading for movies of about 1 minute in length. And when you're getting onto more advanced projects, or you want to take up more class time, maybe up to 2 minutes in length. 2 minutes is a long time. It's a lot of music. There's actually a famous quote, or I read a quote from John Williams in a book about film composition. And apparently after a full day of work, John Williams ends up with 2 minutes worth of music that he uses in an actual film score. So after working for, I don't know how long he would work in a day, let's say he works for 6 hours in a day, he ends up with 2 minutes worth of music at the end of that. So, and he's fairly experienced. So, if you're doing this with students, I would definitely stick to something really short. So first project is to start with just sound effects. As I said, I take this short film and I get the kids to put sound effects in place at exactly the moment that they happen in the film. This is really good for teaching them the tech skills of how to line up the sound effects with the movies. I won't go into great detail about that here in this episode. I may actually devote a whole episode in the future to film scoring just generally. But you can do that. You can line it up in GarageBand or Mixcraft. You can line up the sound effects exactly. And it looks really cool. You end up, you can apply any sound effect to any bit of action on the screen, and it doesn't even actually have to strictly match what's on the screen. So I've had a dog on the screen in the past, and I've had students matching up a chicken squawking sound to the dog bark, where the dog's head moves and it looks like the dog's barking. So you don't have to take it literally. Great practice for students just to get those tech skills down. They can use, if you're using notation software, of course, you don't have sound effects like dog bark and door slamming and car starting in your notation software, but you can use percussion instruments instead. So that's what I've done in the past, is to use untuned percussion to represent the sound effects, and that's worked really well too. Now, after the sound effects have been put in, I actually get students to add ready-made music, just as an introductory activity. Add ready-made music into their project, and I actually get them to add in 2 different types of music. So one loop might be a dramatic loop, and then the second one might be like a peaceful kind of calming style music loop. And what you can do is put both of them into the same project, mute one of them and play the film through with the sound effects and example number 1 that they've chosen. And then you can mute the first example and play example number 2 with the movie and the sound effects, and just see the difference, the contrasting difference that the effect of the music has on the movie and how it makes you feel about the movie scene. That works really, really well. And I've done that lesson in kind of like a double period with some students. I've done that quite a lot with students in the past. I've also done it right through from grade 5 students all the way up to year 12 students. And of course, you have different expectations at different year levels, but it works well with all age groups. After that, a more advanced activity would be to do the same sort of thing, maybe with a movie that's around a minute long, and get the students to work on the sound effects like they did in the first activity. And then instead of using ready-made music for the soundtrack part, they're actually going to create their own music. So in effect, they're sort of bridging the hit points, bridging where the sound effects have gone in the movie. So when we're adding sound effects in that first project, I tie it into hit points, being the terminology used by movie composers. And a hit point in a movie is not necessarily just a big explosion or something major happening. A hit point could be something like even a kiss on the screen between 2 characters, something where there's action taking place. So the sound effects that they're putting together in the first step of this process are to match up with the hit points in the project. And then after that, they're going to add some music to bridge those hit points together. Older students can go on to creating motifs for specific characters or themes for different places, And there are some great examples, of course, that you can play for students. Before even getting into the technology and putting all this together, it's a great idea to start out with a lot of listening. So you can, there's millions of examples again on YouTube of film scores that you can listen to and specific composers that you can choose to play the students. And I choose to show them a couple of things. There's a movie called Scary Mary, which someone has done a recut version of the Mary Poppins movie trailer, and they've applied, sort of spooky horror music to it. And it makes Mary Poppins look like some kind of psychotic character. It's really great to see the effect the music has on something as sweet and innocent as Mary Poppins, and it's a really great short example to show students about the effect of music on a movie scene. Lots of other examples on YouTube too of things that you can show them. So I hope that's given you a few ideas for projects that you can do with middle school or with those software programs or apps that you've got, and you're wondering how to best use them with your students. If you'd like more information and sort of in-depth training and tutorials on all of these projects, come and join me inside the Midnight Music community. I've got lots of downloadable resources. I've actually got a whole collection, for instance, of movies that are suitable for film scoring projects. I've got a collection of ones that I've used over the years, which are copyright free or Creative Commons licensed, so you're legally able to use them. And they're short. They're either short in the first place, or I've edited them to make them short, just down to say a minute or so. And they're really, really useful. It just saves a lot of looking time. Time-consuming part of doing film scoring is looking for movies. You can also ask me inside the community, you can ask me any questions about running these lessons with your students. And if you have problems, come and post the problems and we try and solve them in there. The Music Tech Teacher podcast is hosted by me, Katie Wardrobe. You can find more information and links from today's episode at midnightmusic.com.au/16. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.